You've heard it for months now. Steelers like mobile quarterback. Mike Tomlin talking about mobile quarterbacks. Art Rooney talking about mobile quarterbacks. Mobile. You think you're down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. But the truth is that the Steelers, the idea of the mobile quarterback that they are talking about wanting or even needing to make their offense work in the near future isn't what a lot of people envision when they hear mobile. A lot of people think Lamar Jackson or even Russell Wilson. It's more so just a guy who extends plays with his feet and and forces defenses to honor the fact that they can move around a bit. I'm Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Joining me will be Adam Bittner of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're going to talk about this facet, why it's so important, what kind of quarterback the Steelers will be locking onto, and how that plays into Matt Canada's future here with the Steelers, whether it's one more year or further after that. We'll find out all that stuff right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching the video on YouTube, hit the like button on it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily content for free all day, every day. And thank you for making us your first listen every day. Joining me is our recurring guest from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He is the man himself, Adam Bittner. Adam, this is maybe your fourth or fifth foray on the show, but we enjoy having you here, man. And something that you do a lot of analysis about when I see you tweeting is talking about quarterbacks, the style of quarterbacks and how different things play into the analytics. Adam, I want to lead out, just cut right to the chase here about this mobile quarterback situation. When you look at what the Steelers try to do offensively, and granted, this year with the offensive line and everything else going on, there were a lot of other issues, but Ben Roethlisberger, for all the things that he has done in his career and for as long as he's been with the organization, the limitation of him not even being able to really extend plays as much as he even used to maybe 5 years ago, it limited the Steelers on offense. You could see it on tape. You could see it on opposing defenses' game planning. And it seemed to scream so loud as to far as why things couldn't open up more for the Steelers offense.
Yeah, Chris, I was rolling my eyes pretty hard on, I think it was Friday, when Art Rooney spoke to the media and he was talking about mobile quarterbacks as, quote, the way of the future, where I feel like it's really not that complicated and it's not simply about the future. Yes, you're going to have guys like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes who are going to kind of define what the greats in the genre are at this period of football history. But the point I kind of made was if you could go back and get Ben Roethlisberger at number 20 overall this year, when he was the prospect he was in 2004, I think you'd take him in a heartbeat because he was able to extend plays. He was able to scramble. He was able to shake guys off, as we've seen some of these guys, especially on championship weekend, do. And I think that's the gear that, the Steelers offense has missed. And I don't think it has to be this. You need some dynamic game-changing talent at the position, to improve. I think you just need to not be what Ben was. And I found it especially rich coming from Art Rooney, considering he's been kind of leading the charge defending Ben and his obviously diminished skills over these past couple of years. Because I think it was obvious to a lot of people that the Steelers offense was being built around Ben's limitations rather than the things that he could do. And I think you just want to get to a point where a guy physically, you can build the offense around what he can do. And that's how things open up is what he brings to the table and not what he doesn't. And I think that's what the Steelers have fallen into. So I don't think it has to be, a reinvention or imagination of the entire game of football. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. You just have to be able to get outside the pocket sometimes and make plays happen. Ben Roethlisberger did that. It's not anything new. They just need someone who can do that moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be. Again, Rooney even confirmed he's not talking about, hey, let's just go draft Malik Willis or, hey, let's go get the fastest quarterback out there. He's just talking about, hey, we just need a guy who can, once again, if we run the RPO and, it's a fake to the running back or hitting the slant and you cover both of those, but you forget to take away, the left side and the quarterback can run there. You just want a guy who can do that. Or even, like you said, it doesn't need to be Josh Allen. And Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are even themselves two different types of mobile quarterbacks, quote unquote. Josh Allen's legit a mobile. He will run the ball. He will be a running back out there and truck you out in space. Patrick Mahomes, I mean, his 40-yard dash time was the same as Peyton Manning when they compared scouting combines. He's not a fast guy, but he's enough to be able to take if something's right there in front of you. And I do think he's also, he's benefited from being as young as he is, at this stage of his career. We'll see how if that keeps up the later he gets. But you're right. Ben Roethlisberger, he didn't do what Josh Allen did, but he did a little bit of what Josh Allen does, just to keep plays alive in the pocket and roll outside the pocket and then throw on the run. When you're a defense and you're game planning and you're going in every week and you're saying, hey, these are the things we have to watch out for. We have to watch out for say example, the Steelers this year. Well, Najee Harris is the problem. Diontae Johnson's a route runner. Chase Claypool, they're just going to throw bombs, so we don't got to worry about him. But imagine if in all that mix and Pat Freiermuth and guys like that, you have a quarterback where it's like, hey, we'll take care of these guys, but we have to also contain this quarterback. And teams didn't do that. I mean, when you watch their pass rush was not gap control. It wasn't gap integrity. It was just, hey, just crumble the pocket and force him to have to move, because once he has to move, he's toast. And that was just a reality when the Steelers had plans this year.
Yeah, and I think about a guy like, maybe here's a name, and it might trigger some people a little bit, because I know he's a very divisive figure in Steelers world. But Jimmy Garoppolo yesterday,
do it.
I knew it. But there was there were a few plays there where he was bottled up and he got out of there, and he was able to make a throw, and he was able to keep plays alive. And he's not a guy that you think about as a quote running quarterback. Or even a Patrick Mahomes type. He's more of a pocket guy, but he was able, to kind of do those things that Ben Roethlisberger couldn't necessarily. He was able to shrug off the pass rush, and that's just. I think it would be such a game changer for this team. So I'm not advocating for Jimmy Garoppolo per se. I'm just pointing out that he's another name you can kind of put out there to kind of say, okay, this is close to what the Steelers can get. I don't know. We'll have to see what's in the market by the time they get there. But it's all about not putting yourself in a box. And I think Patrick Mahomes is a guy who also benefits from having a ton of playmakers that maybe the Steelers don't have. They have so much speed, they have so much quickness. Sometimes it just seems that offense runs on easy mode just because of the guys that they have. And I don't know that the Steelers necessarily have guys that are that quick and that fast and can kind of get open in very tight spaces. So, there's probably going to have to be some work there. It's not all about a quarterback, but when you combine, maybe you get, a speedier guy with, a quarterback who moves, that opens up a lot of options that the Steelers don't have today. And I think that's, kind of the point.
That is the point. It's about opening up options, forcing defenses to honor different things. It's something that I talk about every week when you're talking about game planning. You want to force the other side, offense or defense, to have to worry about all these different things. And the more things they have to worry about, the better chance they hesitate, and you have the chance to set the tone on a play and take advantage and execute the play that you called. I want to talk to Adam about what guys we're actually talking about here. What guys could be realistic for what the Steelers are trying to do at quarterback next year, whether it's in the draft, free agency, or currently on the roster. These are questions, or a guy that's on another roster and maybe they'll trade for. We're going to talk about those options in just a second here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we'll talk to you guys about our sponsors, betonline.ag. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march through the playoffs and beyond. With the Super Bowl coming up, there's going to be all sorts of prop bets that you want to capitalize on, and BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action throughout 2022. With the new year comes the new updated desktop and mobile website. To sign up today, be sure you do so, and you'll receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use the promo code Locked On. That's LOCKEDON, Locked On, and you'll get started on betonline.ag. From football to basketball to hockey to boxing, right down to UFC and your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2022 season at BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports, and BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Adam Bittner. We're continuing to talk about Steelers mobile quarterbacks. Now, Adam, there's a lot of different guys that can be out there. Everyone's doing their draft talk. Everyone's going to be talking about it. I was talking about Tim Benz on the WPXI Final Word Sunday night, and he proposed Derek Carr as an option, trading for him. Something I've advocated, for Steelers fans to understand is, if you're rebuilding this roster, if you're trying to build up the offensive line, if you're trying to get more weapons off, if you're trying to make that defense elite against that, whatever quarterback you get doesn't have to come in and be Tom Brady or be Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or someone like that. It's going to take, if you're going to trade for a quarterback, it's going to take not trading a whole lot to get that quarterback. And also not, making sure that whatever quarterback that you get isn't taking up a big chunk of your cap space. Adam, are you in on the Steelers making any particular move to get a veteran quarterback that's currently on the roster that would cost them either draft picks, players, or both to get?
See, I feel like that's kind of doubling down on the Ben Roethlisberger strategy with someone who's not Ben Roethlisberger, at least not who you kind of had Ben Roethlisberger in mind to be for the last 5 to 8 years. That strategy kind of worked with him because he was, in fact, an all-time great, right? And things with the killer bees were working, and you can afford to mortgage the future when you have a guy at that position who's dynamic and can make plays. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're gonna talk about the Derek Carrs of the world, or a Jimmy Garoppolo, or maybe a Teddy Bridgewater, or potentially a guy from the draft, that roster management is a completely different animal because you don't want to be pouring a ton of money into that quarterback, which allows you to build up the depth. And so you want to be able to hold on to your draft picks, because otherwise you're kind of running a Ben Roethlisberger strategy without a Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback. And you're asking too much of a guy who maybe can't do that much. And I think, with quarterbacks, I've heard a lot of people just kind of look down their nose at some of these veteran names because they haven't won at the level that Steelers fans want them to, and right. Things like that. I think it's about adjusting expectations in that way too. What does having that guy at quarterback allow you to do with the other parts of your team? How does he allow you to bolster your depth? So that if one guy goes down, your defensive line isn't torn up for the entire year. So that if Devin Bush is a bust at middle linebacker, there are guys who can step in and make plays, and maybe you can hide that weakness a little bit better. That's what it's all about as well, because you only have so much money to spend in the NFL. It's about moving your resources around. So, when you hear some of these names, I would encourage you to think in that way is, what does this allow us to do roster-wise? What options does it have? How deep can it make us? Because I think we saw in a lot of ways, we were at late stage Ben this year, and there were a lot of holes with this team as well. So it wasn't just about his diminished skills. It was about the holes that they had on this roster that they couldn't address because they put so much money into him for so many years, and they had traded so many picks to kind of supplement around him, so that it leaves you with a thinner roster than I think the Steelers have traditionally had or would want.
That's a great point, Adam, and that's something that I've been talking about for a while with the Locked On Steelers podcast, and just what we've been looking at. When I look at rosters, and you look at what does a roster aim to do from a front office standpoint, and you look at, okay, there's a lot of money tied up in these guys, which means you need the most production out of these guys. That's just how the roster works. And when Ben Roethlisberger is your highest paid player and not even close to being your best player, that's a problem. And that happens with different teams across the NFL. There's times they overpay a guy, and that becomes a problem. Stephon Tuitt, is a problem when he's hurt and he's taking up that much of your cap space. That's another situation. But you need for the best rosters, you need those guys up top to be producing at a high level, or if you don't, you need some of those lower level guys to produce a high level that aren't getting paid that much. And that's where either you run into a lot of luck and you just happen to draft a guy or sign a guy that turns out to be a diamond in the rough, and you're in a great spot. But normally, if you're in that great spot, that spot don't last for long, because then that person wants money. And I think that's where the Steelers have been, and that's where they need to go as far as this quarterback position. I'm with you. If you're trading to get a guy, one, you're giving up draft capital to do it. Two, you're going to be giving up good salaries, cap space to get them. And both of those things are things that are assets to this Steelers team for the first time in maybe since 2003, when they didn't have Ben Roethlisberger, or maybe 2007 when he signed his first non-rookie contract. But point being, this is an opportunity the Steelers have to build the roster in a strong way that's going to favor whatever quarterback they eventually get that they think might actually have a chance to be the heir. I see a lot of people saying, oh, you want to go back to Cliff Stout, you want to go back to this guy, you want to go back to that guy. And I'm like, they're not saying going back to the 80s, man. They're just saying, hey, sometimes the best move is not to just jump at every quarterback that comes up, because if you did that, well, most teams miss on their quarterback picks, and it's just the law of averages. So, Adam, again, I look at the opportunity the Steelers have right now, and if the quarterback falls to you in the draft that you really like and you think is a great fit for your pick, that's a different story. I think if Kenny Pickett falls low enough, I don't think that he'd be very interesting. I think if they could get Malik Willis in the second round, if they had addressed maybe center or offensive tackle in the first round, that would be very interesting. And there's certainly guys that can fit that mold, but I've advocated for this last Wednesday, is that, hey, if you spend this entire draft and this entire free agency on just making sure that the next 4 or 5 years you're going to have a solid offensive line and an elite defense that you poured a lot of money into and a lot of effort into, and that there's built chemistry there, then next year when that draft class comes around, presumably you're going to see guys like C.J. Stroud, you're going to see guys like Bryce Young, you might see guys like Brennan Armstrong from Virginia, and whoever else rises up at the last second and becomes that year's Zachary Wilson or whatever. You could have a chance to go up and get one of those top guys who have a higher pedigree than this year's class. And then you're bringing that guy into the same position that Ben Roethlisberger was brought into back in 2004, a strong defense that was pretty much paid for and done. They were able to sign guys like James Ferrier to be a major part. Kimo von Oelhoffen, another one that they brought into the team. And then also you have an offensive line that you've paid for, a strong running game, and maybe a couple talented receivers. I think they still need to find stuff there. But Adam, to me, that's the direction I think they should be going.
Yeah, and I think you make an interesting point about the 80s in that, people talk about it almost exclusively in terms of the quarterback, but how many Hall of Famers were on that roster by the end of the 80s? You know what I mean? And the 80s didn't happen in a year. The 80s were, they had mortgaged the future for years and years and years, and that was at more positions than quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. It was a lot of different positions that just weren't as good as they were in the 70s. And I think you can make the same argument that that's where the Steelers have been for the last 3 years or so, since Ben Roethlisberger blew out his arm the first time. Just because his name was on the roster doesn't mean that you're not getting 80s style quarterback production there. So, I think people throw around the 80s like it's this, period in Steelers history that you have to completely avoid. And I think there's just lessons to be learned about how some of these things take time, and B, that's okay. And as long as you're orienting your mind toward, laying a foundation to be a good team again early in the Bill Cowher era in the early 90s and making AFC championship games, getting to Super Bowls, even when you didn't have, great quarterbacks at the position, when you had Neil O'Donnell, Cordell Stewart, guys who are not all-time greats, you were still able to get deep runs as a team. And yes, was Ben Roethlisberger the guy that was able to put you over the top after all those years? Sure, but that doesn't mean that the theory wouldn't work maybe one year where, a few bounces go differently, maybe you win that Super Bowl against Dallas. Maybe Cordell gets you to the Super Bowl in 2002. That's kind of what you want to be able to do is have competitive teams that don't require a great quarterback to be competitive. And then when the right guy comes along, you're able to make the moves to do it, and he can put you over the top. So that's the kind of the way I look at, not necessarily the decade ahead, but the next couple of years ahead is you want to accumulate talent. You want to go as far as you can. You don't want to just tank as some of these teams do just to get a quarterback because it might not work out. You want to hold on to your assets, develop them, build them, and then be in a position where you have more options in the future.
And one thing that I was bringing up, the way someone pointed out after the draft like this past year, when all the quarterbacks were shuffled around, no quarterback drafted in the first round between 2009 and 2016 is still on the same roster that drafted them. And that's a crazy thing to think about when you look at like a stretch of 8 drafts. Right there, or 7 drafts. My math sucks. No, I think it's 8. Yeah, I'm right. Look at me, Adam. But point being, you just going up and getting a first round quarterback doesn't guarantee that you got the right guy. And in fact, there were a couple of times the Steelers thought they got the right guy over the years. It's just sometimes it's just happenstance. It's just, the luck of the draw. Just a few years ago, Adam, the Eagles thought they had their guy Carson Wentz, and look how quickly that turned around on them. I think that's something that you have to factor in here, and I think that's something they will factor into their decision, and not forcing, just putting it all on, hey, we went and got that quarterback, he's going to solve everything. It's like, no, build a strong roster so that the quarterback is the thing that can put you over the top, or at least not be the thing that doesn't kill you, because you have so much else going right for you on your roster moving forward. But you brought up a good point about Ben Roethlisberger and the forced situation, the forced hand the Steelers were in, and Art Rooney and how he kind of protected him. I want to circle back to that in just a minute here, because I do think that there's an interesting element that goes into team construction, team chemistry, and team building moving forward that we can I think is valuable to what the Steelers are as an organization and what Mike Tomlin is as coach. We'll do that in just a second here, but first we got to talk to you guys about rockauto.com, one of our great sponsors. You can save time and money when you use rockauto.com. Why choose to spend 30%, 50%, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? For example, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump could be $353 at a chain store, but if you go on rockauto.com, that $353 drops to $216. Because Rock Auto is a family-owned business, they've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every single customer. They have everything that you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. We encourage you to go check out all the things that they have on their site, because they have so many different things to help you, whether you have a small car, a big truck. They got all the parts that you could possibly need, and at the best prices. Go explore their easy to use website today to find the solution that fits your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Be sure to check out Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you. Again, right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you to rockauto.com, where there's amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter here with Adam Bittner of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Adam, back to what I was saying about the Ben Roethlisberger thing. Now, one thing that I think people sometimes overlook when it comes to head coaching, it's not just the X's and O's, it's the management of personalities, management of potential fallout that could happen, and avoiding that fallout for as long as you can, or ultimately altogether. And a lot of people realized when Antonio Brown couldn't last more than a year on any of the teams that he joined, whether it was the Bills, he couldn't even get to because he shot down their trade, or the Raiders, who he left before training camp even broke, or the Patriots, who he left after one game, or then the Buccaneers, which when we saw he threw his shirt into the stands and left. A lot of people realized, man, Mike Tomlin did wonders to keep that guy in line for 9 years before that exploded, and they got out of it and got draft picks for him. But I think that there's something else to look at with the Ben Roethlisberger situation. Now, I'm not saying Ben is anywhere near what Antonio Brown was, but there was an importance, I think, on making sure that the Steelers handled Ben Roethlisberger's end of his career the best way. Because if you had just chucked Ben to the side, 2 or 3 years ago when he hurt his elbow, one, you'd been tied up for money, but two, there were ways Ben Roethlisberger could have made things really hard on the Pittsburgh Steelers, like Aaron Rodgers might, does for Green Bay sometimes. I truly think that they wanted to make sure, like, hey, we got to keep that guy happy however we can, let him know that we value him, make sure that he knows that he's the guy, and not have any questions to that, so that he doesn't feel like he needs to take it upon himself to do something that might mess up the chance to rebound from whenever the Ben Roethlisberger era does end. And in doing that, they were able to give him a big send-off, the big show, in a season where they knew they weren't going to win the Super Bowl. They knew they weren't going to go far in the playoffs. But, you get a game where you win at home, the fans get to like praise Ben, and he gets that feeling of like, man, I had a heck of a career here in Pittsburgh, and this was a real classy way to end it. There was a lot of ways that could have gone. And I think the Steelers, they realized, hey, we messed up by giving him that last super big contract, and we can't really get out of it if we just try to cut ties right now, because that dead money's going to kill us. Do you think that was a strategical part on their player? Do you think they were just like every year saying, yeah, I guess we're just going to roll with Ben and he's going to be our best option. 'Cause I do think that played into their decisions.
Yeah, I mean, you want to have you take us back to this point last year where the Steelers are finally making noises about, oh, maybe Ben's not going to come back, maybe he's not kind of the guy, and but I think the way they had managed him to that point helped them, bring him back with a pay cut, and maybe that was the best option you were going to get last offseason, kind of regardless, considering where your draft position was. I think my job is to be unemotional, right? And I think that's why sometimes my analysis might chap people because, I would have looked at when he blew out his arm. If we're going to take 80s references here, right? That should have been the moment where they started to plan for the future. And I think you can send Ben off properly and plan for the future at the same time. And the fact that they, kind of dragged their heels and really didn't seem to have a plan other than keeping him happy, I think may have been, part of the problem. But, then again, how many options really were there? They were drafting, pretty low in the first round because they were still having a reasonable amount of success even without him in 2019. And then with that 11-0 start in 2020. So it's kind of a mixed bag, right? I think there's definitely some merit in getting him to play ball, especially on the contract last year. I think that allowed you to make some moves that made this season, that even gave this season a chance, to make the playoffs and kind of have that nice finish that you had with those last two wins, and getting into the playoffs. But I also do think there's a level of kicking the can down the road, that you're right. The original sin here was giving him the last contract, and I think giving him so much of a say in the offense, because I think that also led to, he was building an offense around what he could do, rather than what the Steelers should need a quarterback to do. And I think that kind of put them in some boxes from a play calling perspective as well. So it's nuanced, it's complicated. There's no correct answer. I just tend to end up more on the unemotional side of things, because I'm not a fan. I'm not, supposed to be emotionally invested in the team and those heartwarming moments. I'm supposed to analyze and, look at things a little bit more clinically. So, that's where I tend to fall down most of the time. But I can certainly understand the opposite perspective, and I think that's, to your point, is what Mike Tomlin's really good at, is managing egos, managing a locker room, keeping everyone bought in, not losing a team. And I think that's the only way you kind of get the result the Steelers got this year, because I think there were a lot of points at which professionals would have quit on a lesser coach.
Right. And I mean, look at the situation. I mean, look down across the street in Cleveland. You saw Odell Beckham Jr. just be like, I'm tired of this Baker Mayfield stuff. I'm out of here. And then he goes to the Rams, and now he's in the Super Bowl. In the Steelers, they had a Melvin Ingram situation, sure, but that was more so because he didn't get his playing time that he thought he should. But no guy on the offense was like, like Najee Harris, with all the hits that guy took, with all the pounding that he took to get to be the fourth leading rush in the NFL by the end of the season. There was at some point in time, he was like, man, I'm playing with this terrible quarterback. He's not playing well. I don't need to care about this. Why do I care about this right now? I'm gonna wait until my time comes up. I'm gonna sit out because this is getting me killed. But you never saw him doing that. You saw him even in the Ravens game making that huge one-handed catch to get on the drive that they needed to get to overtime. There's so many things that he did this year, and you even saw the culture of it. Ben Roethlisberger, again, they found a way to get the team to buy into him, even though he was playing the worst that he has in his career. And they also found a way for him to buy back into the team that he always has and be able to say, like if Ben Roethlisberger had beef with the team, we've seen how Ben can kind of be petty at times. We've seen how, him and Mason didn't get along because there's always been friction there. Imagine if he did that with the team. And instead of getting him talking to Najee Harris all season long and saying, hey, you got to be the next leader forward, he's just kind of like, you know what, I'm mailing it in every week. And then that doesn't allow for that environment to fester. And what you want that environment to grow into is you want that to grow into the team, the young team that says, hey, we are the Pittsburgh Steelers and we're taking ownership of this identity moving forward. And in a way, I think that if there's still several steps to go, but the very first step of that was properly sending out Ben Roethlisberger on a positive note where he set a good tone with the team, and that a lot of those young guys, Pat Freiermuth, Najee Harris, Kendrick Green, Kevin Dotson, Dan Moore Jr., all these guys, even Trey Norwood, who even said I felt honored that I gave him an interception so he could take a knee on his last for the last play of his last game at Heinz Field. All those guys got to see and feel that, and however a bit kind of pulled up that was because of the drama and the feeling of that moment, even though again the Steelers weren't going to be a serious playoff threat that year. That I think that holds weight, and now you got playoff experience to a lot of rookies and young guys who you're hoping to build around moving forward. Again, I think that's part of this. When we're talking about meeting a mobile quarterback, the Steelers could be in a much, much worse situation if Ben Roethlisberger had just mailed it in or just said, you know what, I'm retiring or I'm taking my money and I'm not giving you any pay cuts. And then the Steelers are looking around like, well, now we're even worse in trying to restart things over.
Yeah, I think that there's a little too much talk about the Steeler way and what it means to be a Steeler, and we talk about it in strategic terms, right?
Right.
What the Steelers have done with their first round draft picks and all of that. I think where it's more resonant is, kind of like what I think of the Chase Claypool music at practice situation, right?
Yeah.
That was something that was shut down on a player level. Really, it wasn't so much about the coaches. It was Ben and Cam saying, "Well, that's just not what we do here, and this is why." And telling the stories of where the origin was and everything, and those are cultural things that do make a difference and add up over time. And I think to your point is I think the way Ben went out gives players a what would Ben do type of idea, and how that fits into the Steelers history. He's kind of a touchstone for all of that for those guys. And there's scenarios where it might not have worked out that way if they really did start to mail it in and they were a bad team and you don't win that last game against Cleveland. But I think once those things happen, you can kind of look back at them and say, that guy was a Steeler. I want to be a Steeler. I've seen a lot of people talking about that last handoff to Najee Harris, on the kneel down against Cleveland is kind of a passing the baton. And I think, I think Cam Hayward is the guy right now who is going to carry that mantle forward. He's an all-time Steelers great. He's a great ambassador for the franchise, but he's getting up there too. And you don't know how much longer Cam's going to be around. So the question is, who are going to be the guys who carry that mantle forward? That's why I find the Juju Smith-Schuster situation so interesting, because I certainly understand the arguments to kind of move on from him. But he seems like someone to me in his public comments who's bought in, and that stuff means something to him. And I wonder what that means within the organization and how they view him, not just for what he brings on the field, but for the mentality that he might be able to carry forward off of it.
Yeah, that's certainly I think that's another factor here is you want to find leadership. And that's the thing I talked about a lot at the end of the season was they're trying to find those leaders. Cam's a leader, but you want to see other guys step up. Guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, who, he's young, but you want to see him grow into that role. Guys like Najee Harris, who they're hoping can become one of those guys. Guys like Pat Freiermuth. You want to see people step into those roles and see, okay, how did this guy do it in that situation? Guess what? I'm gonna try to look at that and take it higher than that. But you're right. The Steeler way, quote unquote, it's always been mystique. It's always, the Steelers way has always been based off of, hey, they have a really good roster and they were able to capitalize on it and they won a Super Bowl and they got to tell great stories. And that's what people bought into. But that's how everything is. The Patriot way is the same sort of thing. It's not some magical thing that they could throw Mac Jones in an offense and win a Super Bowl in his rookie year. It's not that. They had really great rosters. They had a great quarterback and they had their system. It's the same thing, I think, all across the NFL. But you still need to get players to buy into your way, to buy into your organization and the chemistry that you guys have built. And I think for a little bit, people were wondering, will that remain a thing after Ben Roethlisberger because of the lack of older guys that were still on the roster, and then how many rookies they were depending on to come up? I think that as best as they could, they found some guys who might be able to be the answers. And I do agree with you. Juju Smith-Schuster should be part of the Steelers fold. We talked about that last week with ESPN's Brooke Pryor running this show. Go check out that episode if you missed it, because I do think that there is a room for Juju Smith-Schuster on this roster next year, not just with the on-field production of the wide receiver room, but with the leadership component as well. Adam, this has been a great discussion. We've had a great talk. We've talked about mobile quarterbacks, Ben Roethlisberger, contracts, building leaders. I think this is a really good episode that a lot of people are going to enjoy. Thanks so much for joining us here. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Fujimaster24 at the bottom of the screen if you're watching on YouTube, but also all my work appears at post-gazette.com. Getting into some not Steelers stuff at this point, actually. I wrote about West Virginia hoops today. Tomorrow I'll be writing about a couple of nurses who also play lacrosse at Robert Morris, and they've been doing all of this amid the pandemic. So they have a really great story that I'm looking forward to telling, and maybe we'll be getting into some Penn State later in the week. It's kind of getting into that mode for me of just kind of hopping in wherever I'm needed. So stay tuned to post-gazette.com. Definitely check out our beat writers, Ray Fittipaldo, Jerry Dulac, and Brian Bacco. They'll be covering the offseason every single day. And please consider subscribing because it helps us do the journalism we love to do.
Absolutely. Do subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. They do great work. I'm Chris Carter, host of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Remember to hit the like button on this video. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel to get all of our daily content. It's for free, and it comes out Monday through Friday. If you want to help us out even further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review and a positive comment, and you get a shout out at the end of the show, like this person who gave our latest 5-star review, Totally the Papers, who says this is a great podcast for anything Steelers. This is the best podcast for the black and yellow. You can check out. Chris stays on point. He gives realistic and logical takes on the state of the team. As a Northside Pittsburgh native now in San Diego, it's fun to listen to what's happening with the team. He avoids silly rumor mill, hot takes, National Enquirer type of stuff surrounding the team. He's talking sense to the Yinzers. Keep up the great work, Chris, and your guest. Oh, and yeah, I won't say what type, but your guest, Tony, needs an evaluation with some of his takes. Go Steelers. Thank you, Totally the Papers, for your 5-star review. Tony does need help with some of his takes. He's a Mitchell Trubisky bandwagon guy right now, Adam, and I'm not having it on this show. But all things considered, thanks for your 5-star review. If you want your shout at the end of the show, you leave a 5-star review on Apple. It helps us out. Make sure you leave a comment with it. We'll be back with more tomorrow on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.